Welcome to Andy Staples on 3 and Jim Harbaugh Watch 2024 continues. Yeah, there's another new development. Adam Schefter reported on Monday that Harbaugh was interviewing again with the Los Angeles Chargers, and the thought there is that would be the job if he's going to take one. That's going to be the job. He's also interviewed with the Falcons. Bill Belichick has interviewed twice with the Falcons too. I've heard he's pretty good NFL coach as well. So, but we shall see what happens with Jim Harbaugh. The questions just keep coming, and this is going to take a while. As you see, these NFL teams do not work like college teams when they are hiring head coaches. They take their time. They interview lots of people. Like the Chargers are also interviewing general manager candidates. I would imagine that who the Chargers pick as the general manager will probably give us a clue as to who they'll pick as the coach, or vice versa, depending on what order they want to go in. So we're going to find out more as the time goes on. But remember, there's still 4 teams playing in the NFL. There's assistant coaches who teams want to talk to. So this is probably going to drag out a little bit longer, but it is nerve-wracking, I'm sure, in Ann Arbor. And that column we were talking about where I said, look, if you've looked at the last 10 days, if Jim Harbaugh leaves, how do you not just elevate Sharon Moore? It was interesting getting the feedback from that one on Monday. We had a few people say, well, no, they should hire Jesse Minter as the head coach. And I don't think Jesse Minter would be sticking around. I think if Jim Harbaugh gets an NFL job, that Jesse Minter is probably going to the NFL with him, the defensive coordinator. So there's a lot at play here, but I think Moore gives you the best chance at continuity, which I think is what matters the most here. And, when you think about how much Michigan brings back, especially on defense, you definitely want to keep as much as you can. Now, if Minter goes, maybe some of those defensive guys go too. But again, if it's same general coaching staff, most of the same people, they might say, you know what, I'm comfortable here. And then the other piece of it, and people threw this out there that I think is interesting, is let's say Jim Harbaugh were to take an NFL job here in the next week or two. It will be further into the semester than it was at, say, Alabama when Nick Saban retired. So would guys jump into the portal knowing that they can't necessarily transfer to another school for the spring semester, so they wouldn't be able to do spring ball? Or would they wait, and that would give them some time, and maybe that would allow things to cool down? Tim in the chat, wasn't Moore sanctioned for illegal recruiting too? Yeah, he had a 1-game suspension. He was involved, I guess, in the Cheeseburger Gate case, if we're calling it that. And Jim Harbaugh missed 6 games and they won the national title, and they had Jim Harbaugh's back. So I'm guessing if they want to hire Sharon Moore, that what got him suspended for 1 game is not going to disqualify him from getting considered for the head coaching job. Now, I know there's a lot of agents out there that would love if it did, because they would love to get their clients in the mix for the Michigan job, and they would love to get their clients raises. But I think if we look at this with common sense, that Michigan being willing to go to the mattresses for Jim Harbaugh means they're probably okay with someone who was involved in the same case. So it's going to be a really interesting next few weeks. And again, does the timing of this help Michigan, whereas the timing of Saban's resignation hurt Alabama? Because class had started at Alabama, but the final drop ad date hadn't happened yet, and they wanted, the guys wanted to check things out. They had a chance to get into their new schools for spring for the spring semester in time for spring practice. Now there's some schools on the quarter system, so that maybe they're a little bit different, but that piece of it is a very interesting one. Although you can still jump into the portal now. You don't have to decide where you're going, or you can jump into the portal now, decide where you're going, and not go there until after this semester. Tim's not going to let this go in the chat. Illegal recruiting is okay now? Investigation is still open. Tim, I think you must be new to college football. If you win, minor NCAA violations are fine. If you lose, they are terrible and you should be fired for cause. That's how it works. If you win, they protect you. If you lose, they use it to fire you for free. Like, that is how it works. So, yeah, Tim apparently missed the whole season. He apparently missed Jim Harbaugh being suspended for 6 games this season and then them winning the national title. It is truly amazing to me, these the pearl clutchers, when it comes to the NCAA stuff at this point. Like, really? Does anybody even care anymore? Like, some of this stuff is so dumb. And some of this stuff, like, we talked about this the other day. Alex Atkins, the Florida State offensive coordinator, he's going to be suspended for 3 games this year for something that the NCAA president is currently trying to get made okay with the rules. Like, the president of the NCAA is trying to say it's okay, you can bring NIL in-house. But Alex Atkins is suspended 3 games for driving someone somewhere. Tim pointing out that Michigan suspended Sharon Moore, not the NCAA. Yes, they did, preemptively, to reduce whatever the NCAA would do later. So, yes, there may be more suspension coming. There may be more suspension coming if Jim Harbaugh stays. I don't know how to break this to you, Tim. They're okay with it. They're happy with the national championship. So, by the way, the whole Michigan-Ohio State thing has people fired up. We're talking to Bobby Carpenter about the Buckeyes a little bit later in the show. And Ohio State loading up in the transfer portal has people feeling some kind of way. It is great because it makes people mad. We've got Campbell in the chat. They have no proven QB. Will Howard is terrible, and the 2 talented freshmen never played it down in college football. Ohio State can't fool me. They will underachieve once again. Will Howard led a team to the Big 12 title in 2022. Give me a break. He's playing with more talent than he's ever played with before. Like, Deuce Vaughn's awesome. But you know who else is awesome? Trey Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Jeremiah Smith. Like, it is fun to see the Michigan and the Ohio State people going nuts here about this. It's great because Ohio State is on the upswing, and we'll talk about this with Bobby because you got to be careful with both of these because you're trying not to win an off-season championship. The idea is to win the championship like Michigan just did. So I think that what is going on now, though, is Ohio State, the way their roster has come together, and not so much what they've gotten out of the portal, but the guys that stayed, it's actually kind of similar to what happened in Michigan last year, where the Michigan guys stuck around because they'd made the playoffs 2 years in a row, but they hadn't won a game in the playoff yet. And they felt like it was a bit of unfinished business and that they could do more. And so you got like Trevor Keegan and Zach Zenter coming back, and you got lots of really good players that are also experienced and old. And you look at that roster that played in the national title game, it was a very deep veteran roster. So I think that probably is what I find most interesting about the rivalry going into 2024 is Michigan's still got some really good players coming back, but they will be young or inexperienced in some key spots, whereas Ohio State will be pretty experienced almost everywhere. Now, some of them haven't played together yet, just like Michigan was very good at strategically grabbing out of the portal the last few years. But I think they're going to be the old team this year. And being the old team is pretty helpful. So Ohio State's old now. Michigan's less old. Does that swing it back? Boy, Ryan Day certainly hopes so. Because, listen, if he doesn't win this time, it's bad. It's real bad. It is. You are very much approaching John Cooper territory at that point, and you've got to turn this around. Because as someone who has no rooting interest in this thing, it was boring for me when Ohio State won every year, and now Michigan's flipped it. It will get boring to me if Michigan wins every year too. So I would like to see them both go back and forth in this thing. I think that would be fun. Ohio State seems to be loading up for that very possibility. But again, we don't know. Now, we got a gift from our friends at Fanduel on Monday. So you know how it works. You go to fanduel.com/staples, you sign up. They give you $150 in guaranteed bonus bets when you place a $5 bet. Well, what could that bet be on? The 2024 Heisman Trophy odds, because they just put some out, and it's crazy because we don't have any idea who's going to win the Heisman Trophy. It is as wide open as I can remember it. And, there have been a lot of years where somebody's come out of nowhere. And this feels like one of those years where someone could. But the favorites we know, but there's no favorite that we're supremely confident in. Like last year, Caleb Williams was coming back. He just won. Now, if you know the history of the Heisman Trophy, you're probably not betting on a repeat winner because Archie Griffin's the only one. But Jaden Daniels had crept up. Now, he wasn't the second or third this time last year, but by preseason he was. But this one's really interesting because you've got Texas QB Quinn Ewers at the top of the list and Carson Beck at Georgia. They're both plus 750, which means you bet $100 to win $750. And Ewers, we just saw him in the Sugar Bowl. Now, there's still questions about him with Arch Manning. What's going to happen with that job? Ewers is going to be the unquestioned starter, I think, going in. But if there's any sort of sign of struggle, Arch is there. So as Heisman favorites go, I don't know that that's where I'd go with that one. Carson Beck is going to be the quarterback on a really good team. He's going to be the quarterback on a team that wins probably 10 or 11 games. So that feels like a pretty safe one right there. Dylan Gabriel at Oregon is an interesting one because he was very good at Oklahoma the past 2 years. Obviously, Jackson Arnold comes in. He's got more eligibility. He's the 5-star recruit, the star of the first Brent Venables recruiting class. So they let Dylan Gabriel go. And now he goes to Oregon, where Bo Nix just showed you what you can do in this offense and left a lot of toys behind. So I think that's a really interesting one. But man, this thing goes so deep, so deep. Jackson Dart plus 1,800, the Ole Miss quarterback. That's going to be an interesting one. Will Howard transferred to Ohio State. He's plus 1,200. He's in the top 5 on this one. Now, I think, again, like we were talking about Ohio State, defense is going to be pretty good. Not going to have to score a ton, and they might be better on the ground than through the air. So I don't know if you're going there. But, I mean, look, Cam Rising coming back to Utah. Plus 5,000 as Cam Rising leads Utah into the Big 12. Jalen Daniels plus 4,000, the Kansas quarterback, one of the most fun quarterbacks to watch in the entire country. Maybe here's a weird one. So Tyler Shook is plus 10,000. Oregon fans know who Tyler Shook is. Texas Tech fans know who he is. This is a guy who was a big-time quarterback recruit, went to Oregon, transferred to Texas Tech. He's never really been healthy for a whole season. Sort of like the Michael Penix Jr. thing. Well, he's at Louisville now. So he's with a guy in Jeff Brom who's very good with quarterbacks. And if he could just stay healthy for a season, could he be in the mix for something like this? It is. We got Dylan Raiola. If Nebraska fans, if you're that confident in your freshman, he's plus 10,000. We haven't seen him take a snap in college yet. It's amazing. But that list goes on and on and on. And like the West Virginia fans were asking me where Garrett Green was. I posted 4 screenshots. The list kept going. FanDuel is making sure that everybody is represented. You've got, both guys who could win the USC job in Miller Moss and Jordan Maivea. You've got lots of options there. So check it out. Download that FanDuel app. Sign up, fanduel.com/staples. They are going to give you some fun things to bet on, especially these Heisman Trophy odds early in 2024. Plus, you got that Gronk kick of destiny at the Super Bowl. That's fun. Where you're figuring out if Gronk's gonna make or miss the key. He missed it last year, so you decide one way or the other. But lots coming up at FanDuel, especially in the next couple of weeks as we get closer to the Super Bowl. So, I see the Michigan fans and the Ohio State fans are yelling at one another in the chat. It is fantastic. I'm enjoying it very much. Everybody's mad. People calling each other idiots. Let's go. This is why I brought Bobby Carpenter on. That's why I wanted General Bob to help us talk Buckeyes, because what Ohio State has done in the portal in the last week has gotten everybody in a tizzy. The Ohio State fans are excited. The Michigan fans are mad. The other fans in the Big Ten, they don't believe it yet with Ohio State. They want to see it. The fans of the SEC teams who might compete for the national title, who might make the playoff, they want to see it. They need to see it from Ryan Day. But man, it is getting everybody up in their feelings. So let us talk to General Bob Carpenter about the Buckeyes. Joined now by former Ohio State Buckeye, host of the Morning Juice on the Fan in Columbus, Ohio, host of the Bobby Carpenter Show. Bobby Carpenter, how we doing?
Mr. Staples doing pretty well. Despite the fact it's a little cold outside, we got a little snow on the ground. I mean, it's almost the end of January. We got 1 month done, and that means we're a month closer to the start of spring ball.
Exactly. And Ohio State, it's going to be crazy. The reason I wanted to have you on is we were talking about the changes Ohio State had made, what they'd picked up in the transfer portal, and it made people so mad. And I was like, I got to talk to General Bob about this, because I imagine in Columbus, the feeling has gone from, okay, what is going to happen now after the bowl game to, all right, this all might work.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of concern after the bowl game. Obviously, as everybody watched it, offense looked, woefully inept. Offensive line didn't look good. Defensively looked good for probably 50 minutes. But there was just a concern, with Ryan Day. He lost to Michigan 3 years in a row, didn't make the playoff this year. Did last year prior, played Georgia really tough. So I think there's some positives in there as well. But I think everybody realized this was going to be the year, and how is it going to change? Had a good recruiting class, but freshman, is that really going to be the answer? And Ohio State, if you look since the portal, whenever that started, Andy, a couple of years ago, they'll go get some specific needs, but they're not going to Deion Sanders this thing and try to bring in 30 guys. So could you find the right guys? And until Nick Saban had left, they really hadn't made a lot of noise. They brought in Will Howard, so the quarterback situation looked fairly settled, but you're trying to find some game changers other places. And so now with the portal opening for 30 days due to Nick Saban's retirement in Alabama, going down there and being able to bring in McLaughlin, their center, bringing in Caleb Downs, which was a huge coup. And then, even down the line, Julian saying that's big, but that's not going to really have much of an impact on this year, but it got everybody kind of fired up again.
Well, and McLaughlin's interesting because the Alabama fans are like, okay, that was the center who was having trouble snapping. But what people don't realize is, okay, if he can't get the snapping part under control, he can just play guard. Yeah. Like, the dude can block.
I think that was Ohio State. Everybody looked like, oh my gosh, that was the guy from the game. Like, first of all, he started like 20 some odd games for Alabama. So I don't know an offensive lineman who started for Nick Saban for 2 seasons who is not what you would define as a quality player on the interior of the offensive line. And then you said, is it a situation where, maybe get the yips a little bit, maybe the change of scenery can help, or maybe, like you said, you just slide over to guard and you're able to play there. Ohio State has 1 guard coming back. They've got some flexibility in there to be able to move him around. And so I think this will be a situation in the spring where it'll be exploratory and they'll try to figure out, what their best 5 up front is going to look like in McLaughlin. Who knows where he could ultimately line up, and whether that's center again or potentially guard. Well, I think that we'll have to find that out.
And the Caleb Downs thing is really interesting because freshman All-America. So he plugs right in, but it's what it allows Ohio State to do. And you were talking on your show with your co-host Anthony Schlegel about what it means for Sonny Styles, who's a safety who's like 230 pounds right now and is probably going to be linebacker size once he gets to the NFL. So this would allow him to potentially move to linebacker.
Yeah, he's an interesting test case. His dad's a big guy. Obviously, played a long time and very successful. And you looked at Sonny, I remember seeing when he was a freshman in high school. And he's got his older brother, Lorenzo, who is more of a defensive body. but they were, I think they're 2 or 3 years apart. I think Sonny was a freshman, Lorenzo was a senior, and they're from my area of Columbus. We grew up playing at Pickerington. My dad coached against them. I'll never forget watching Sonny. He's like, that's the freshman? Like, he's 180 pounds. He's 6'3". It's like, that's what I looked at as a sophomore. I was playing linebacker, not safety. And so you've watched this physical development of him. And when he got to Ohio State, I'm like, he's 215, 218 pounds, and it's just a function at 18 years old. And Andy, I tell everybody this, guys, when they're talking about positions and what they want to do, as you know, as you get older, it only gets harder to lose weight, not easier. When you're young, it's like gain. That's tough. When you're older, it's like, my goodness, like, I ate a hamburger. Now I got to pay for this for the next 2 days. So I think it was the natural progression. Like, Sonny's big. Like, he has a body and a frame that's very similar to mine. Like, he's just going to gain weight. He's probably a guy that's 240 to 245 pounds just by normal lifting and eating for him. And so bringing Caleb Downs in frees up that spot to where you can slide Sonny down. And now you don't feel like you're maybe chasing it a little bit on the back end. And by the way, you're getting a wholly terrific player in and of itself.
Right.
Who's going to go pair with a guy in Lathan Ransom, who's really smart, veteran in the defense, understands everything, great tackler, probably not the athletic prowess you're going to get with a Caleb Downs. You move Sonny up, that gives you that athletic prowess. Then at linebacker, I was telling guys, like, when you move down a position, then you become the best athlete there. I go, it's really a great situation. If you can handle the weight, whether it's linebacker to D end or whatever, safety to linebacker. And so now you have a dynamic playmaker there. And hopefully this will give him time throughout the spring to then ultimately learn that position and develop it as well.
So, I mean, Ohio State, you mentioned, had not made a whole lot of noise in the portal till Will Howard. And then you get Quinshon Judkins and then Caleb Downs and Julian Sayin. And it feels like they are taking that part very seriously now. And has anything changed on their end in terms of aggressiveness, or was it just that the right situations had to present themselves?
I think there maybe is a little bit more nature of being aggressive, Andy, with this, but I think a lot of it too is it's the right situation. And they brought in Davidson Igbenusson from Ole Miss. He has the connections with Junkins. Obviously, there's some movement on the staff. And, when you bring guys in with the portal, then there's also guys that may also want to leave. And maybe that was the case with Ole Miss. If you're, especially with NIL dollars, how they're allocated, people maybe don't feel like they got exactly what they wanted, or maybe they were, I don't know, not respected enough or whatever. So you have to be very careful and make sure. So bringing Judkins, obviously, with Travion Henderson, that was a key to make sure those guys were on board. Hey, you're not going to carry the ball probably 300 times. Are you guys good with each carrying at 200? And honestly, I think that they were both ecstatic about that for their load management, not getting beat up. And let's remember, Andy, to win a national championship this year, you're talking 16, 17 games. Like, this is going to be a long and arduous season. And so I think that they've been targeted. And then part of it is some of these things just, they kind of manifest themselves. Nick Saban leaving obviously opened up a ton of talented players. And when you're second in the running for Caleb Downs out of high school, you see what he can do. He's now a known quantity. You bring in Bill O'Brien, which probably allows you to maybe have that relationship with Julian Sayin. So I think that there was some of those things that just naturally happened, and the fit kind of worked out, and it was a way to get it done with maybe out upsetting or being like crazy aggressive or just trying to throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks.
The Bill O'Brien thing is interesting to me because so I know that Ohio State played Missouri in the bowl game, and I remember there was a press conference, and Eli Drinkwitz got asked about a season in of giving up play calling, being more of a CEO, and he talked about how he thought it was a big reason why they were so good this year. And I wonder, Ryan Day is sitting right there. Like, was he thinking about that? Like, oh, maybe this would work better for me, because you're bringing in Bill O'Brien to run the offense. You're not bringing in him to just help the game plan.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably going to be the majority of the play calling. And if you look now, Andy, in college football, the head coach, it's tough to call plays, whether it's offensively or defensively, because you have so much else on your plate with recruiting and NIL and making sure everything is humming at a high level. And so I think Ryan, he can still be involved with the development of quarterbacks, but he can hand that over to Bill O'Brien. And plus, one of the other things Bill provides, he was a head coach at Penn State. He was a head coach with the Texans. He's been an assistant under Nick Saban and Bill Belichick in some of the best programs with respect to their level that you're going to find. With the departure of Kevin Wilson a couple years ago, I think Ryan, he was just a couple years older than me. You lose that veteran sounding board. It's someone that can push back. And Bill O'Brien, who sat in the chair at press conferences, because that's a big piece of it. Like, yeah, let's just do this. Well, you're not the one that has to answer the questions and has to justify all this. So Bill O'Brien brings not only the game calling aspect and game management on the offensive side, but also that veteran presence of being there, understanding what it's like to be the head coach, and probably having the confidence to have some hard conversations and dialogue, which is what you want with your staff. You see Nick Saban, his coaches, getting in fights all the time because, if you have guys who are independent thinkers, you want them to push on you, and that's the way things are going to get done. So I think Bill O'Brien really checked a lot of boxes for Ryan Day.
Yeah, and I think it's very underrated how much Wilson brought to that staff, and I mean, just his history as an offensive coordinator and having been a head coach. And then now you get that with O'Brien. But the other thing I keep thinking about with this team, like as you got the announcements of this player's coming back, this player like JT Tuimoloau, those types of guys, it feels like they are going to be the old team this year, whereas Michigan was the old team in 2023. And it feels like that is really, really important in this day and age.
I'll take you a quote that Chris Holtman, the basketball coach at Ohio State, told me. He's like, in college basketball, you want to get old and you want to stay old. And it's a little bit the same in college football. And when you can bring in some of these guys, when you can have your own guys return, which I think is really key because they understand the culture, they have the relationships, they understand how it works. You mentioned JT, you've got Jack Sawyer, you brought back Denzel Burke, David Igbenuson's going to be there, Jordan Hancock, like a lot
Lathan
of
Ransom.
impact. Yeah. Lathan Ransom, like you have all these impactful guys who have played a lot of snaps. And then you can supplement that with really talented young players, a la Caleb Downs. You can have a Sonny Styles, like some of those guys. And now all of a sudden you have that mix of what you're ultimately looking for. And so that was a huge element to this. And this is college football. It's always about recruiting. It always has been, always will be. But there's now added layers where before it was just high school recruiting. Now it's high school recruiting, recruit your own players. And then when guys get in the portal, figure out if there's guys in there you can recruit and try to supplement what you have. And so that was kind of a perfect storm this year, and things really worked out. And honestly, Andy, if you probably don't lose to Michigan and you make the playoff and you have some success, I doubt a lot of those guys come back. And so we look at an era now where everyone's like, oh, it's this and that. And you saw it happen with Georgia. You've seen it happen with Bama, where I think there is some element of unfinished business, wanting to have that success and being able to kind of have a banner or something that you have hung yourself with your classmates.
Oh, some of the Michigan people said if they hadn't lost to TCU the year before, you don't have that team that goes undefeated this past season. So I think you might be exactly right about that. So as someone who is in town, doing shows every day, finger on the pulse here, what is the vibe difference in Columbus about Ohio State over the past 2 weeks?
Oh, the uptick has been tremendous. And you don't ever want to, and you cautious yourself about like, hey, winning the offseason.
Right.
Player acquisition is a real part of it. And they're guys, especially like Caleb Downs, you were recruiting him in high school. You kind of knew what he was. The Julian saying like that's a nice bonus for down the road. But I think everybody feels really good now about, where NIL, that situation was with Columbus. And then, the addition of the coaching staff, bringing in veterans, Bill O'Brien, like all of these things in concert, Andy, there's a positive momentum around this team that feels really good. And then you had the women basketball team beat Iowa with Caitlin Clark. So it was like a really nice weekend. The men's hoop team won. Like everybody was winning and you're getting great players. So it was a huge.
Yeah, it's all the about, because like at that basketball game, you got Aaron Nolan taking pictures and like, hey, I ain't going anywhere either. So it's like they're getting guys and there's not even the usual strife of, okay, what does that mean for everybody else?
Yeah, and especially like Aaron Nolan and him, obviously him and Julian are in the same class, but no one's expecting these guys to start. I mean, if one of them starts this year, either A, they're phenomenal and they're going to be like a generational guy, which they could still be anyway, or B, like Will Howard wasn't what you thought he was, and that's not a good thing. No one really wants to make a living with a true freshman starting quarterback. Even Trevor Lawrence, so that's like a decision that's coming down the line, not day one. So that'll push that out, and they can be competitive, for the backup role, working the season, but really a year from now, next spring is where you'll see that competition manifest itself.
So CJ Stroud joined the platinum donor group for the foundation, the NIL collective. Did an email go out to all the former players after that? It's like, all right, let's go, boys. Get your checkbooks out.
I just saw that, and these guys make a lot now, and they have the ability to do that. And I think having your former players around, having them contribute, it used to be contributing to facilities needs and whatever. And I've been involved with that. Guys who I played with have been involved in that. And those are conversations, and they have big fundraisers, Andy, and believe me, I go to those and contribute money in those opportunities. But having CJ Stroud, a guy who is recently out, understand the gravity and importance of it, and you've heard him talk. I mean, he's obviously went through a lot of in his life, and the situation with his father, and so he leans in a pretty big way on this. And I think he wants to give back and wants to continue to be a part of the university. Which you have a guy like that who's playing that well as a rookie, it's pretty impactful.
Absolutely, and it's another advertisement for the program too. So, Bobby, thank you so much. Listen to Bobby on the Fan and listen to the Bobby Carpenter Show. Download it, subscribe. It is fantastic. Your guy Anthony Schlegel is amazing. I tell him I was looking because I may be getting the difference. So Bobby's co-host Anthony Schlegel, former Ohio State and Jacksonville Jaguars strength coach, invented this incredible thing, which every football program in America uses now. But my son was MacGyvering like a dummy in the backyard so he could do pass rush moves on it, and I'm like, I know a guy, I know a thing.
Hey, thedifferenceusa.com. Go check it out. I mean, there's a bunch, almost, I don't know if every NFL team has one. A lot of the college teams, I mean, a ton of them have them, and they're great to develop hand placement technique, whether you're a lineman,
striking,
linebacker, defensive back, receiver. Like there's applications all over the place, and you can put it on a basketball hoop, or they've got rack attachments. There's a million different things they can get done. So it's a great design by my man Schleg's getting it done.
Oh yeah, well, we got to give him the plug, and yeah, he may be getting some business from me very soon. So I'll keep you guys posted. Bobby, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Andy. Thank you.
That is the great Bobby Carpenter. You can also hear him on SiriusXM College Sports Radio. He and Jacob Hester, another friend of the show, they do Meathead Radio on a lot of afternoons, and it is spectacular. The show is officially named Off Campus, but when Bobby and Hester get together, you have a linebacker and a fullback, and you can only imagine what the collision sounds like. So it's a fantastic listen. Another fantastic listen, our man Jesse Simonton. He had a great story at On3, which I highly recommend everybody reading. It's available, no paywall, just read it. He talked to a ton of college football coaches and personnel people and administrators about what do you do with this wacky college football calendar? Because all the different rules changes, plus court decisions, plus basically every state legislature is making decisions. Everything else has created this wild schedule where nothing makes much sense. And so instead of just giving the coaches a platform to complain about it, which they often do, Jesse talked to some folks who have some pretty constructive ideas. And I thought it was a really interesting story. So we talked to Jesse about that. We talked to him about a column he wrote on LSU recently. And yeah, we got back into those Heisman odds because they're absolutely fascinating. Here's Jesse. We welcome On3 national columnist Jesse Simonton, who had a very interesting story at On3 on Monday from the coaches convention. And it was interesting, Jesse, because you asked these people these questions, and then several hours later, Nick Saban retired. And it just sort of underscored everything they were talking about, because this is the coaches talking about the calendar. But what I liked about your story is instead of just a bunch of coaches complaining and saying it's the end of the world, it was a lot of coaches with ideas about what you can do going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully I was trying to paint a picture that obviously there's a lot of griping and ills within the sport of college football right now, within the current landscape, the tsunami that is kind of the transfer portal with NIL, with this chaotic calendar. So I just kind of proposed over 4 days in Nashville, talking to all different managers of people, whether it was head coaches, personnel, staffers, recruiting coordinators, what have you. If you got to play college commissioner for a day, how would you fix it? What would you do? Present to me some tangible solutions. And I think within the piece, there was some interesting takeaways.
Yeah. And now all of them seem to think eventually contracts are coming, which we happen to be talking on the same day that the National Labor Relations Board trial with the USC and the Pac-12 resumes. Like, that may happen sooner rather than later, and it may not be the school's choices. That may be kind of they're forced into it. But it also, like, that's what I don't know if people understand. Like, the people in charge of the schools don't want the players to be employees. The coaches just want rules that they can get their arms around. And if the players have contracts and you say, okay, well, this guy signed for 2 years and this guy signed for 1 year, at least and they can't just hold you hostage every single, week, month, year.
Oh yeah, I mean, Rhett Lashley. I had a lot of the comments and stuff were off the record in the piece, but I did get several. Matt Rule and some other guys gave me some really good stuff on the record. And Rhett Lashley was one of the guys, SMU's head coach, former G5. Now he's going to be, in the ACC. Talked about that. We're the only school, and it's kind of similar to something Lane Kiffin has said, but that the fact, they're playing championship games and free agency's happening at the same time, and then it really doesn't stop now with the multiple transfer opportunities. And so we are barreling towards having these contracts. What that system looks like, whether it is true revenue sharing, whether the players are deemed actual employees. Like you said, the coaches don't really care, but I made a kind of a joking line in the piece that, they're ready to give up a piece of the pie, i.e. some of their salary money, just for some actual off-season piece,
Yeah.
We're talking two different pieces here, but the whole thing is that right now it's just too chaotic, and they're frustrated, they're exhausted. And you brought up the Nick Saban point. I had an SEC staffer that literally the day before had noted that, Nick Saban visited all his signees this year, all of Alabama. I think it was like 23 Alabama signees in home. This guy's head coach could not do that because they were back at home trying to make sure that their roster wasn't getting splintered from the transfer portal. Well, the irony is this guy then pointed out, well, Georgia might have actually benefited from not making the playoff this year because, look, they got to actually bring in some transfers where Alabama didn't. Imagine if that guy knew then what we know now.
Yeah.
With the way the whole situation's played out with the 30-day window and Alabama's roster, Washington's, Arizona's on down the line just being ransacked.
Well, so you had an idea from some of the coaches that they'd like to have one transfer window, kind of like the NFL free agency period, and maybe do it in the spring. And I know that the answer to that would be, or the counter to that would be, well, but then the players can't do spring practice. I heard an interesting idea the other day, and this is not something that the coaches brought up. This has been brought up at some other levels about you could just change the idea of spring practice and have NFL style OTAs and mini camps that could be later after that transfer window, after you've assembled your roster for that season.
Yeah, and again, if we're going to, Matt Rule kind of said this, if we basically are a professional sport, but just not in name, because we're not doing the things, i.e. the contracts, we're going down a line where we need to actually act like professionals, doing OTAs and kind of eliminating what has always been spring practice makes perfect sense. You and I were talking before we hopped on. I think some have suggested it. Ultimately, we may have a transfer portal combine down the road.
That
a lot of
crazy.
These guys, a lot of staff and head coaches are a little bit more reticent to say this because they're not getting into the weeds. But when you talk to the personnel directors and some of the assistant coaches and recruiting coordinators, they'll fully admit half the time they don't know these guys. They don't know their parents. They don't know the background. They don't know if they have accurate height, weight, speed, what have you. Yeah, they might have some film. Charles Huff, Marshall's head coach, actually did, say, how much money have we wasted bringing in guys on official visits just in a snap in 24 hours, hoping that we get a kid and then we don't land him because he doesn't really know who Marshall is. He's asking for X, Y, and Z. And we're like, Charles Huff's like, man, we're Marshall. We're not Alabama. And so I do think there'd just be some greater transparency. Right now, there's 2,200 kids that have entered the portal. Half are uncommitted. Half.
Yeah.
So how many of these guys are just not going to get degrees? And that's something that I think Dabo Swinney and some other coaches have kind of been pretty public about. What is this generation of football players going to look like down the line in terms of where they are at 26, 27, 28 when they're moving around so many times and the educational aspect has just kind of completely gone out the window.
Well, it'll be interesting. And again, it's a lot of it's tied to this other stuff, like the NLRB case and the House case that's in the federal court system. Those things all have to kind of shake out, and then they can kind of figure out what the new system is. But I'm glad people are actually coming up with ideas now instead of just complaining.
Yes. And you know what? In these models, Andy, frankly, yeah, this is kind of a up on the whiteboard. This is a no bad ideas deal because
Absolutely.
Throw them out there and kind of, let's see what works, because I do think kind of some of the current model, and a lot of coaches have said this, that it's not sustainable, that this Wild Wild West deal, several of them use some good colorful language, but that it's not sustainable. And it's we as the collective college football, universe have to kind of figure out ways to make it equitable for everyone, for the player, for the coaches, for the schools. And if that's the big boys branch off and kind of do their own thing, if that's, we create this various, whether you do want to, sign a 1-year contract or a 2-year contract. Again, all these coaches are still for player movement. You could do that. And then, as these guys said, if you break your deal,
movement, because they don't want to be stuck with somebody for 4 years either.
Exactly. And if you do break your deal, you would pay back. In some of these suggested models, proposed models, you would pay back whatever. If you broke, okay, I had a 3-year contract. After year 1, I want to go to school Z instead of staying at school Y. You're going to pay back the rest of that money that you got. So there's a lot of different proposals within the piece.
Wait, a buyout? The coaches should be very familiar with those. So
exactly.
They definitely know how those work. All right, let us talk about some of the other stuff that's going on in the news, Jesse, because we got news from Adam Schefter. Yeah, exactly. There is no offseason. We got news from Adam Schefter on Monday that Jim Harbaugh was going for interview number 2 at the Chargers. He's also talked to the Falcons. I had a column saying, look, if he goes, what we've seen in the last 10 days says you got to promote Sharon Moore. Do you think that's what Michigan would do if he goes? Do you think that they might look outside?
You and I are in lockstep. I tweeted something very similar. I was on SEC Mike's show late last week, and he kind of asked me, or he kind of posited this whole situation where he thought that the domino effects of Michigan, and then could LSU, unravel if Michigan ends up going to Brian Kelly. And I said the simplest solution for the Wolverines to maintain their roster and kind of continue that continuity is just what you wrote. And that's promote Sharon Moore. It's sitting right there. And if that hadn't been any more, evident with what we've seen happen in the ripple effects of Nick Saban, I don't know what is. I mean, Sharon Moore already proved himself as a solid, candidate or replacement late last season. I think he has as many top 10 wins as James Franklin does his entire tenure at Penn State in 1 year. So I would promote the man. I would keep as much continuity as possible. If Harbaugh leaves, you're probably going to lose Jesse Minter, with him to the NFL. So I would absolutely green light Sharon Moore, Michigan's next head coach.
Yeah, and we'll find out, I guess. It is so weird. I find this fascinating. I've talked about this a bunch on this show, but I want to talk to somebody else who also covers college football about this. How weird is it watching the NFL hiring process and comparing it to the college football hiring process?
Well, what's funny is that we've seen, and there's been different opinions on why they do this, but like the Falcons or the Chargers tweeting out, we have interviewed X person again. We have interviewed Bill Belichick again. It's like, are they doing that for transparency's sake? Or are they doing it kind of to throw their fans a bone to say, hey, we're chasing the big boys. I promise. We may we may land Ben Johnson from the Lions or Raheem Morris, but I promise we went after the big dogs. But I think Harbaugh to the NFL has felt like the destined path since before the season. It was one of my bold predictions. Still waiting on him. I did a whole revisited piece late last week. That's the only one that's still TBD. So I said I thought this would be his last season. We still don't know if that's the case, but it seems to be kind of trending that way.
So another piece you wrote recently that I found very interesting, and we've all gotten into this business of how do you fill the void, the vacuum left by Nick Saban. We had Justin Hokanson on the show talking about what Auburn does now. We had Zach Berry talking about what Ole Miss does now. You had an interesting thought of which program can jump in the quickest, and you said LSU.
Yeah, you think I'm right or wrong on that?
I think there's a good chance. But I also think
I said
where Texas is right now is a possibility. Oklahoma, Texas A&M, but LSU, when you look at what they've been able to do over the past 20 years, does seem like the most logical.
Yes, and that's kind of how I arrived at. I think you could list any number. You could throw in, as you referenced, Auburn and Ole Miss. I think Tennessee is in a similar situation. Obviously, Georgia is in its own field. I think they benefit the most from the vacuum that is.
I just think Georgia's at the top anyway. I think they were already there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're in agreement here. So my piece and the point was who could maybe replace that number 2 or secondary top spot of Alabama. And I just think, look at what Brian Kelly's done this offseason. He cleaned house, literally. He fired Matt House and his entire defensive staff. He brought in 2 guys in Baker and Corey Raymond that he basically deemed weren't qualified to be on his his inaugural staff, brought them back to LSU, was able to get Bo Davis from Texas. And even though he doesn't have an offensive coordinator yet, they have the number 1 quarterback in the country, the number 1 player in the country in 2025. They have the number 1 recruiting class already. It's early, I know. But I mean, I think, as you said, what they've done in the last 20 years, Brian Kelly went there to win championships. He knows the expectations. If this Michigan stuff doesn't come to fruition or isn't even true, then I think LSU is absolutely positioned to perhaps fill that vacuum. Their schedule next year, pretty favorable. They don't play Texas, they don't play Georgia, and they get Alabama, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss at home. They got a crazy game against USC in week 1, but this isn't just about next season now. And that's the whole thing. Kalen
right.
DeBoer
this is over the next 5 years, 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Kalen DeBoer is now having to play major catch up on the recruiting. He's 3, 4, 5 steps behind what Kirby, Hugh, Sark are doing. What Brian Kelly, again, number 1 recruiting class, has already assembled at LSU. And so there's an opportunity here for 1 or 2 programs in the SEC, I think, to really make a leap.
Yeah, I don't think Brian Kelly's going anywhere, by the way. The Michigan stuff just confounded me. Like, where I don't even know where that's coming from. I don't know that Michigan would definitely promote Sharon Moore. There's always a chance they could go outside if Harbaugh leaves, but I don't think Brian Kelly would leave LSU for Michigan at this point, even if it was open and they were looking outside. Like, that wouldn't make sense to me.
It would be very peculiar with what he's done, both from a staffing and roster, management. So I agree. It would be quite strange.
Yeah, I thought that all the smoke about that was a little weird when it came out. So it seems to have died down somewhat. But we'll see what happens if Harbaugh makes that decision. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Jesse, is we got early Heisman odds already on Fanduel. Fanduel.com/Staples if you want to sign up. Place one $5 bet, get $150 in guaranteed bets. But this is a long list. I put a tweet out where I had 4 screenshots. That wasn't all of them.
Yeah.
There's even more below that. It is a long list. Like, they have covered their bases with, like, they've got, like, for USC, they've got Miller Moss and they've got Jordan Maiava, who just transferred from UNLV. But at the top, let's talk about at the top of this. Quinn Ewers, plus 750. Carson, Beck, plus 750. Those are your front runners. Dylan Gabriel, plus 1,000. Will Howard, your new Ohio State quarterback, plus 1,200. Jalen Milroe, plus 1,200. So that's the top of the list. I love this because it goes so deep. You got like Ollie Gordon, plus 15,000. And I'm like, ooh, like $10 on Ollie Gordon. You have yourself a nice little Christmas bonus if he has a big year.
Noah Fafita,
Yeah.
plus 2,000, huh? I the one that jumps out to me, if you're buying the hype, and I think this team is going to be the hype team of the offseason, or at least one of them, is probably Jackson Dart at plus 1,800. I would bank on him if you're looking at like who he's with. Like the fact that Nico has better odds than him is a little strange to me. But again,
have they looked at the receiving cores of those teams?
Yeah, I mean, and look at what I mean. Ole Miss's offense is going to be awesome, and Dart's also going to, he's going to scoot a little bit with his legs, and so he, that's that's a little rich for Quinn, though, don't you think? 750. I know they've got Bond and some of these other guys out of the portal, but I mean, he could lose his job mid-season.
Let me throw this at you, Jesse.
Right?
While we're talking about this, let me throw this at you. More likely outcome: Quinn Ewers wins the Heisman, or Arch Manning is Texas's starting quarterback by the end of the season.
Yeah, that's why I just said. I mean, he could lose his job. I would pick the latter.
Yeah, I don't know that that's going to happen, but it probably is more likely than him winning the Heisman.
Right. Whereas Carson Beck is, he is the guy at Georgia. Milroe is going to be the guy for Alabama. I think that's probably a little rich with what Alabama's returning at receiver right now. So we'll see what that roster looks like after the spring portal. Certainly, Will Howard will be in position if they let him run a lot, but it may be the two running backs that kind of garner the most acclaim in Columbus with the identity shift that I think Ryan Day is kind of embracing this offseason.
How about DJ Uiagalelei and Cade Klubnik being right next to each other at plus 2,500 and plus 3,000? And oh, by the way, they're now playing for ACC rivals. Like that is. I want to go to somebody 5 years ago and just or even that. Okay, remember that night when DJ filled in for Trevor Lawrence when he had COVID at Notre Dame, and we were like, "This is the next big thing. He's going to be amazing." He winds up a Dr. Pepper commercial. Like DJ Uiagalelei and Cade Klubnik will have almost identical Heisman odds, and they'll be playing for ACC rivals in 2024. Can you even imagine?
I mean, there's guys on Will Rogers is plus 5,000. He doesn't even know.
He doesn't have a team.
He has better odds than Cam Rising, who's going to be on a top 10, top 12 Utah team. That's insane.
It is crazy. Although I do love the Sunflower State quarterbacks on this list. Jalen Daniels at plus 4,000, Avery Johnson at plus 5,000. So Jalen Daniels needs to play 12 games. That's the tricky part there. Is he's been hurt every year of his career and missed some games. Like to win the Heisman, you got to be able to play almost all the games. Avery Johnson, as we know, those of you who watch the show regularly, I'm all in on Avery Mania. All in.
Kind of speaks to maybe where some of these guys think they should be drafted or not. With Cam Ward's Heisman odds, don't you think? The fact that he's way down there at plus 2,000, I guess that's why he probably needed to come back to school. Because if he was going to be a day 1, day 2 NFL draft pick, I think those odds would probably be a little shorter. But it's an interesting list. It's fun.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Now I went back to last year because I was curious. I didn't realize. I think I had memory hold that Jaden Daniels made a huge push over the summer up those lists. Like he was second or third. He was right behind favorites. Caleb Williams. Going into the season. And I remember, I don't remember noticing that or paying much attention to that as it was happening. But somebody knew.
Somebody knew, and I have egg on my face because I wrote a piece that basically said I think this is foolhardy, and While I loved LSU's receivers and I wrote that I thought Neighbors was going to be one of the best in the country, I did not believe that Daniels would make the sort of leap that he did. And he was transcendent. I mean, he was a remarkable player. And that is what I will say will make this Heisman race so fascinating, Andy, is unlike the last couple of years, we don't have a returning guy. There is no Bryce Young. There is no Caleb. Obviously, Daniels is going off to the NFL. So it is wide open. Yeah, Beck and Ewers and some of these guys are going to be the favorites. But the reason FanDuel can list 50 guys is because we really have no idea. And every year there's going to be somebody, be it a Max Duggan 2 years ago, Stetson Bennett, that just comes out of nowhere to compete for this thing.
Well, and I tweeted out, 4 screenshots, and the West Virginia fans like, "Where's Garrett Green?" I'm like, "Oh no, he's on there. He's on there. Plus 20,000." I just ran out of screenshots.
So, just keep scrolling.
That's right. So yeah, it is basically, and I think this is one of those. If you just have a guy you really like, who you enjoy watching play, put like $50 on it and forget about it. And then see what like if he blows up, you're gonna get that email or you're gonna get that message in your app. It's like, hey, can we buy you out of this? Like, so
yeah, just pick your 4 favorites, put 25 on each. Hey, ride it out and say have some fun.
Yeah, because I think that's really the better way to do it than trying to guess who's gonna blow up and be that guy. I think I agree with you on Jackson Dart. Like if we are just trying to logic this out, if he has a healthy Juice Wells and Trey Harris is what what he was this past year, and Priest Corn is just as good as he was that last year, and oh by the way, Ulysses S. Bentley averaged like Ulysses Bentley Ulysses S. I almost made him a Civil War general. Yeah, exactly. Ulysses Bentley the fourth. Excuse me. Averaged 5.7 yards a carry last year. So if that offense is what we think it's going to be, the Jackson Dart thing makes a lot of logical sense. It is really hard to logic puzzle the rest out. Like I was very big on Carson Beck going into last season because people, he was down the list. Now that he's a favorite, I don't know if there's much value there, but I do think there's a good chance he winds up in New York just because he's probably going to be the starting quarterback of the team that's going to be number 1 in the country for a while. The Will Howard thing's interesting to me just because now they just keep picking up people around him. Although with Ohio State, with all they brought back on defense and they get Caleb Downs, they might need to score a whole bunch.
Well, yeah. And you know what's going to be interesting about the Heisman race this year too, Andy, is that I don't think fans have probably really put into perspective what these gauntlet seasons are now going to look like with the 12-team playoff. And so, there's going to be more losses. There just is. I mean, we mentioned, LSU's playing this now crazy SEC schedule, plus they have USC and UCLA. Georgia's playing Clemson and a renewed Georgia Tech. Alabama's going to Wisconsin. There's not going to be teams that are going 17 and 18 and 0. And so with that, guys that we just saw a year ago, Jaden Daniels wasn't punished. The fact that his team lost 3 games, I think that's going to become more of the norm, where if you're putting up these insane statistical seasons, you maybe don't have to be Carson Beck on the number 1 team in the country. You can be on a team that maybe is a fringe playoff team, but you had some big moments in big games. Oh, and wow, this dude's got 50 touchdowns,
Right.
Let's give him the award. Whereas
it's not his fault he doesn't play defense and his defense stinks. Like that.
Right.
That's
right.
That's what everybody had to come to grips with last year. And I got all those tweets. You can't give it to a guy whose team lost 3 games. I'm like, he doesn't play defense. What do you want from me?
Yeah. And, there was lots of the whole pushback after Penix had the one nice, and he had a great, semifinal game. But the revisionist history that he should have won the award because he played really well against Texas was silly.
Yeah,
he had some stinkers during the regular season, and Jaden Daniels.
That's what I told people. I was like, okay, put Jaden Daniels on Washington, and what's Washington's record? Put Michael Penix Jr. on LSU, and what's LSU's record? And the answer is they both have the same records they had.
Probably, yeah.
Because LSU was not going to learn to play defense. None of that would change that LSU couldn't play defense. So
and Washington's offense might have been even scarier because Daniels
Exactly.
also ran for 1,000 yards.
Yeah. So it is going to be a wide, like everything else about this season. And then we're going to, Jesse, I'm going to throw this out to you. How should we handle this in this offseason? Like on the show, I was thinking about this every few months, maybe have like a primer day where we remind everybody everything changes this year. I feel like the wide openness of the Heisman is even, another piece of that. Like,
Right.
hey guys, the schedules are brutal in the Big Ten and the SEC now. Hey guys, there's a 12-team play. Like, we got to keep reminding everybody of this because like it floats out of my mind sometimes, and I get thinking in the traditional mindset.
Oh, well, let's circle this back to the very reason we started this conversation. The anonymous coaches, griping about the calendar. The national championship next season, Andy, is on January 20th. 2 days from
it just happened.
2 days. It just happened. And so what in the world is the portal going to look like then? Again, I had somebody tell me, basically the way the system is currently set up right now, the longer and deeper you go in the playoff next season, the more your team's actually going to be punished. The roster is going to be punished for the following year because you're not going to be able to bring in transfers on visits, because of drop ad dates. And so I think that the primer deal every couple of months, would be a great little offseason reset. What do the conferences look like? What do the dates look like? What are the big games? What is the current playoff system look like? Because that's still kind of up for debate in the future.
New college football 101. Get ready for it this offseason.
Go.
But as you said, Jesse, there is no offseason.
Not anymore.
We'll talk to you later. There is indeed no offseason. The news never stops. Right before the show started tonight, Arizona announced Dave Hickey, the athletic director, done. He's done. He just hired a football coach. Well, now that we know he's done, I don't know how much input he actually had into the Brent Brennan hire, but Brent Brennan is Arizona's new football coach. Dave Hickey leaving. Whoever gets the job next to Arizona has some financial difficulties to overcome that not of that person's doing, and they'll just have to figure it out. But that's happening. You've got transfer portal still going. Further down in the transfer portal, so Sean Callahan from On3's Husker Online reported this today. Former Florida State and Nebraska quarterback Chubba Purdy, brother of Brock. So he was going to go to San Jose State, which is where Brent Brennan was, but he's now at Arizona. So Brent Brennan went to Arizona. Ken Niumatalolo coming in at San Jose State. But now Chubba Purdy has decided he is going to transfer to Nevada, where he will play for Jeff Choate, former Texas assistant. Everybody got all that? Yeah, it never stops. But that's okay. That's what makes it fun. And trust me, there'll be fresh stuff to talk about tomorrow. So we'll talk to you then.